He wrote the song in 20 minutes. That is the part of the story that Kris Kristofferson always found slightly embarrassing to admit. Not because he was ashamed of the speed, but because the song had become so large, had accumulated so much weight and history and meaning in the years since, that admitting it had come quickly felt somehow disrespectful to everything it had enjoyed. Like saying that the thing you built a cathedral out of had once been just a pile of stones you happened to have lying around. He had written it in 1969, in a period of his life that was defined by the particular combination of ambition and obscurity that marks the years before a breakthrough, when a person is working as hard as they will ever work and producing things they believe in completely and being almost entirely ignored for both. He was 32 years old. He had a degree from Oxford, where he had studied on a Rhodes Scholarship. He had been a helicopter pilot in the United States Army and had taught at West Point. He had walked away from all of it to write songs in Nashville, which was the kind of decision that families and former colleagues find difficult to understand, and that the person making it cannot entirely explain, except by saying that there was nothing else that felt like the real thing. Nashville in 1969 was not particularly interested in Kris Kristofferson. Died Ewell. He was working as a janitor at Columbia Recording Studios to pay rent. He cleaned the floors where other people made records. He put his own songs on tape in the same rooms after hours, with borrowed equipment, and sent the tapes to people who mostly did not respond. He was, by any reasonable external measure, a 32-year-old janitor, with a lot of degrees and a conviction that was becoming increasingly difficult to sustain in the face of sustained indifference. And then, on an ordinary day, in an ordinary week, he sat down and wrote Me and Bobby McGee in approximately 20 minutes. He would later say that the song had the quality of something that had been waiting, rather than something that had been built. The imagery was specific: a road, a thumb in the air, a man and a woman, moving through a landscape that was at once particular and universal. The line that would eventually define the song arrived somewhere in the middle of those 20 minutes. Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose. He did not know, when he wrote that line, that it would become one of the most quoted lines in American popular music. He did not know that it would eventually reach a 27-year-old woman in Los Angeles who was in the last weeks of her life, recording the album that would become the fullest expression of everything she had spent a decade building, and that what she would do to it would change not just the song, but his understanding of what the song had always been about. He just wrote 20 minutes worth of words and music, and set them aside, and went back to cleaning floors. But the song had begun its journey, and where that journey ended, and what it cost, and what it gave, and what Kris Kristofferson heard when he finally understood what had happened to his 20 minutes of words, is the story worth telling. The first version of Me and Bobby McGee that most people heard was Roger Miller's. Miller was a country star of real standing in 1969, a man who understood the mechanics of a song that told a story with economy and feeling. His version caught the song's road poetry and its forward momentum, and delivered both with the craft of someone who had been making records for years. It was a good version. It was not the version. There is a distinction, not always clearly articulable, but real, between a song being well performed and a song being revealed. A well-performed song shows you what it is. A song that is revealed shows you what it was always trying to be, in a way that makes all previous versions feel like drafts. This is not a judgment about quality or craft. Roger Miller's version was not a draft in any pejorative sense. It was simply a version that had not yet found the voice the song had been written for, without the songwriter knowing he had written it for any specific voice. Kristofferson heard Roger Miller's recording and was pleased, relieved, in the way that a songwriter who has been ignored for years is relieved when anything they have written is recorded by anyone with standing in the industry. The record was evidence that the work was real. That was not nothing. But the song kept moving. Johnny Cash recorded it. Other artists followed. Each version brought something, left something undiscovered. The song was becoming part of the landscape, recognizable, well-regarded, the kind of song that people in the music industry discussed as an example of strong songwriting. Kristofferson's name was becoming known, not yet famous, but known. And somewhere, a woman who had been listening to everything she could find, every blues record, every folk record, every piece of American music that carried something real underneath its surface, heard Me and Bobby McGee for the first time. What Janis Joplin heard in that song, and what she decided to do with it, is the hinge point of this story. But to understand the hinge, you have to understand what she was carrying when she found it. Janis Joplin, in the fall of 1970, was a different person, in important ways, from the Janis Joplin who had exploded at Monterey in 1967. Not different in the way that fame changes people by making them more guarded or more distant from whatever they had been before. Different in the way that genuine development changes people by making them more fully themselves, more able to access what was always there, more skilled at translating the interior into the exterior, without losing something essential in the translation. She was 27 years old. She had left Big Brother and the holding company, which had been both a necessary artistic decision and a loss she had not fully processed. She had spent 2 years with the Cosmic Blues Band, producing work she respected and being quietly dissatisfied with in ways she had difficulty articulating, even to herself. She had assembled the Full Tilt Boogie Band, which had given her the specific quality of musical conversation she had been looking for, the sense of music being made rather than performed. And she had found, in the preparation for Pearl, a clarity of artistic intention that producer Paul Rothchild recognized immediately as rare. She knew what she wanted the record to be. She had been sitting with certain material for months, turning songs over, deciding how much of herself to bring to each one, and the decision for each song she chose was always the same. Everything. She would bring everything. Me and Bobby McGee had been in her orbit for a while before the Pearl sessions. She had played with it privately, turned it over, held it up to different lights. The song was about roads and freedom and loss, things she had direct experience with. Not as metaphor, as biography. The hitchhiked miles from Texas to California. The years of moving without a fixed destination. The specific education of a person who had chosen freedom and discovered, somewhere along the way, that freedom and loneliness were not opposites but the same thing experienced from different angles. The line Kristofferson had written in those 20 minutes, "Freedom's just another word for nothing left to lose," was not, for Janis, a clever formulation. It was a description of her own life, written by someone who had never met her, in language that fit the experience more precisely than she had ever been able to fit it herself. She decided to record it. And when she walked into the vocal booth at Sunset Sound on October 1st, 1970, she did not approach it as a cover version. She approached it as a confession. The recording itself took several hours. Not because the performance was difficult to find. Paul Rothchild noted early in the session that she had this song in a very specific place, had already done the interior work before she arrived at the studio. The hours were because she kept finding new things inside the delivery, each take reaching somewhere the previous take had not reached. Each pass through the material more complete than the last. Kristofferson was not present for the session. He was somewhere that was not Sunset Sound in Hollywood on October 1st, 1970. He had no particular knowledge that Janis Joplin was recording his song. The music world of 1970 did not have the instant communication that would allow a songwriter to know, in real time, what was being done with their material on the other side of the country. What happened in that vocal booth, without his knowledge, was this. A woman took 20 minutes of words and music and breathed an entirely different life into them. The phrasing that Kristofferson had used, the clean country folk structure, the forward momentum of the melody, the highway imagery. Janis kept all of it and transformed what it meant by the simple act of singing it as though it had happened to her. Because it had. Not in every specific detail, but in the emotional truth underneath the specifics, the feeling of being in motion and being free and understanding, slowly, and then all at once that the freedom was inseparable from the loss. In that truth, the song had been written about her life as much as about anything else. John Till, the guitarist playing behind her, said afterward that there was a moment in the final take where he stopped thinking about his own playing entirely. He said he became, temporarily, just a listener. That the performance happening a few feet away had created conditions in which his professional attention dissolved into something more basic. A person hearing another person say something true. When the final take ended, the studio was quiet. Rothchild's voice came through the talk back after a moment. "That's it. That's the one." The tape was kept. Life continued. And in Nashville, Kris Kristofferson went on not knowing. Pearl was released on January 11th, 1971. Janis Joplin had been dead for 99 days. The album went to #1 on the Billboard charts within weeks, and stayed there for 9 weeks. Me and Bobby McGee was released as a single in late January. It went to #1, the biggest chart success of Janis Joplin's career, and it arrived 3 months after she was gone, unable to know it. Kris Kristofferson heard the single on the radio. The specifics of that moment have been described by him in various interviews over the decades since, with the slight variations in detail that attend any memory that has been revisited often enough to become a kind of story a person tells. But the core remained consistent. He heard the first few bars and recognized his song, and then he heard what Janis Joplin had done with it, and something shifted in him that he spent several years trying to adequately describe. He said that hearing her version was the first time he fully understood what the song had been about. Not what he had intended it to be about, he knew that. But what it was about underneath the intentions. What it was about when a life that matched the song's emotional truth was brought to bear on its words and melody. He said he had written the line about freedom being nothing left to lose as a kind of philosophical observation, a formulation that felt true in an abstract way. He heard Janis Joplin sing it and understood that it was not abstract at all. It was the most specific thing he had ever written. It was about a specific kind of life lived by a specific kind of person, and the person who had lived that life had now sung the words, and the singing had revealed what the words had always been pointing toward. He cried. He said this without embarrassment, the matter-of-fact way that people describe strong emotional responses when enough time has passed. He cried, and then he sat with what had happened, and then he began the process of understanding something about songwriting that would take years to fully articulate. What Kristofferson came to understand in the months and years after hearing Janis's version challenged some of the assumptions that songwriters commonly hold about their own work. The common assumption is that a song belongs to its writer in the most fundamental sense, that the writer's understanding of what the song means is the correct and authoritative one. This is not vanity. Exactly. It is a reasonable response to the experience of writing, which feels like discovering rather than inventing, like uncovering something that was already there. If you discover something, it makes sense to feel proprietary about it. But Kristofferson had written a song that a woman he had never met had sung more truly than he had understood it, and the experience of hearing that had done something irreversible to his understanding of ownership. He said in an interview some years after Janis's death that hearing her version had taught him that the song had known something he didn't know when he wrote it, that it had been reaching toward an experience that it could gesture at in his version, but that needed her life, her voice, her particular combination of excess and vulnerability, and the specific biography that Port Arthur and San Francisco, and all the years in between, had produced to be fully said. He said, she completed it. Not corrected it. Completed it. The way a lock completes a key. The key was made for the lock, even if the person who made the key never saw the lock. This formulation, the key and the lock, is the one he returned to most often. He had made something that needed her to be finished. She had finished it. The completion was posthumous and irreversible and permanent, and it had changed both the song and his understanding of what songs were for. What struck people who heard Kristofferson discuss this was the quality of the grief in his language. Not the grief of loss, but the grief of understanding something important, too late, to share it with the person who had taught it to you. He never met Janis Joplin, and then she had taken his song and shown him what it meant, and then she was gone, and the conversation that should have followed could not happen. He carried that, with the particular weight of something unfinished that cannot be finished, a debt that cannot be repaid because the person you owe it to is no longer there to receive it. In the decades since, Me and Bobby McGee has been recorded by dozens of artists. Each version adds something, leaves something undiscovered. But there is a reason that when people think of the song, they think of Janis's version first. It is not simply because hers went to #1. It is because her version has the quality that Rothschild heard in the recording booth, and that Kristofferson heard on the radio. The quality of a song being sung by the person it was written for, without the songwriter knowing he was writing it for anyone. Busted flat, in Baton Rouge, waiting for a train. She sang it like she had been there. Like the specific weight of that specific kind of waiting was something she knew in her body, rather than her imagination. Like the woman in the song, and the woman singing the song were not quite the same person, and not quite different people, were instead the specific blurred thing that happens when a life and a lyric are close enough in emotional truth that the distance between them disappears. That disappearance is what Kristofferson heard when the song came on the radio in early 1971. It is what made him cry. It is what he spent years trying to understand and finally settled on the image of a key and a lock to describe. She completed the song. He had made something that needed her to finish it, and she had finished it. And neither of them had known that was what was happening. Kris Kristofferson has said that he thinks about the fact that she died before he could tell her what her version meant to him. That there was something he learned from her recording that he would have wanted to find a way to say directly, and that the inability to say it is one of the specific losses her death created in him. He was not her friend. He had not known her. The loss was not the loss of a relationship that had existed, but the loss of a relationship that should have been possible. The conversation between a songwriter and the singer who revealed his song to him. He has lived with that for more than 50 years. And he has written songs in all those years that bear the mark of what Janis's version taught him. Songs built with the understanding, arrived at on a radio sometime in early 1971, that the song knows things the songwriter doesn't, and that the job is not to control what the song becomes, but to make it sturdy enough to carry whatever life it eventually finds. Me and Bobby McGee was written by Kris Kristofferson. It was completed by Janis Joplin. And the completion happened on October 1st, 1970, in a recording booth at Sunset Sound in Hollywood, in the last week of her life, without either of them knowing that was what it was. The song knew. Songs sometimes do. And the tape has been playing ever since, carrying both of them. The songwriter who made the key and the singer who found the lock, permanent and together in 3 minutes and 47 seconds of music that neither of them could have made alone. That is the whole story. And it is, in the end, a story about what happens when a song finds its way home. Even when neither of them knew it was happening. Even when one of them never got the chance to know.